Paul, if you could answer this, please. It was the opinion of the Parliamentary Joint Committee that APRA and ASIC must share some of the blame for their slow response to the trio fraud. Do you find it acceptable that investors must wear the losses of fraud when APRA and ASIC breached the trust that they had and they're providing regulatory oversight?
Well, there's two parts to that, in my view. The first is where a government regulator fails in both its obligation and its function, which is what I've described in answer to the first question. The government has an obligation, the Commonwealth, the state has an obligation to repair the damage. That's a simple moral proposition which no one can dispute. We're held to that standard as citizens. I do something which causes damage to your property, I'm held responsible. And that can be something I do by either an act or by an omission. This was caused by the failure of APRA and ASIC by what they did and what they didn't do. So the standard is not a new standard that we're raising here. It's something which applies to us all in society. In a democracy, what applies to the citizens in terms of the moral obligations and standards must apply to the government. The day, and this is what Shorten has, this is the proposition that Shorten has put forward. The day when a government is not held to the same moral standard of the citizen is the day you do really have a serious question of authoritarian government.
And this week's certainly shown that.
That's right.
Could I...
Oh, sorry, there's one second. There's the second part to that. I want to go back to, I'm old enough to remember in the trade unions, and I don't know if Barb's old enough to remember, but when, she's not here, but for those of us in the trade union movement back in the day when Paul Keating proposed this new system with Bill Kelty, what they proposed was a privatisation of the pension scheme which promised a better life for those who could no longer work. For those of us who are on the social democratic side of politics, and I think for the Liberals as well, this is the most important part of government, is looking after those who can't look after themselves. Through no fault of their own. The sick, the elderly, and the young. Okay. What was formed then was a social contract between the government and the people. And that social contract had an implicit clause in it. And this is it. We will protect your future. They didn't say, oh, go into the stock market and make your own decisions and good luck. No one would have accepted that. It was only accepted on the basis that the government was going to be a protector of those investments. And secondly, it would be there as a last resort. In other words, if your investments don't yield sufficient, the old age pension would still be retained. And about 10% of all people who retire on superannuation funds today have to take some portion of the age pension. And I'd suggest that in the years ahead, that percentage is going to explode. And I'll tell you later why that's going to be the case. But secondly, as a protector of last resort, which is what the government was in this social contract, if there was a catastrophic failure, the government would step in. Kelty, Keating, when they put, I was there at the meetings, I remember, put forward the proposition very clearly. You will be protected. No ifs, no buts. Oh, I don't remember Bill Kelty talking to us, Barb, at the ACT Congress where he said, oh, by the way, some of you will be swimming outside the flags. If that hadn't been put forward at that time, there would have been questions. What Bill Shorten has done, and this is something where Stephen Jones should be here today. We'll pursue him. What he's done is he broke the contract. Shorten broke the contract that was formed way back in 1994 when this system was finally brought in. That's a terrible thing under this Labor government, which only underlines why I'm running. Because we can't stomach this anymore. The corruption, the lies, the retreats, the betrayals, on the most fundamental things that are most important to the people who voted for them. This is one of the great betrayals of Australian politics. You cannot leave people to fend for themselves in a situation where their superannuation has been stolen. If anyone had raised at the ACTU Congress, oh, by the way, Bill, by the way, and I remember Keating came and addressed us and talked about this great reform. If anyone had said, oh, by the way, I want to ask the question, what happens if my superannuation gets stolen? Could you imagine if Kelvin had said, oh, by the way, you're on your own. Look after yourself. An absolutely integral part of the introduction of superannuation in this country was the protection of people and their investments. There's no ifs, no buts, no arguments. Shorten betrayed, and he stands condemned forever in regard to doing that. This isn't some matter of, oh, Bill can make a decision about whether he's going to pay you under Section 23 or not. Forget about the Section 23 and forget about the mechanisms. I'm talking about the social contract. And why I'm saying to people, consider voting for me, is to go into the Parliament and pin them with it. Stand up in the Parliament and say, oh, this is a terrible betrayal. It's never been said in this Parliament. It better be said in the next one. Thanks.